And you may see me looking at my phone at different points in time. It is not because I am texting, it is because I have a timer. So please note that. Okay, welcome Drew, welcome Ron and Jackie. Thanks y'all for being here. So and I think because we have Ross and Chuck here, I think we're ready to go. Does that sound okay, Chuck and Ross?
Yeah.
I just want to confirm real quick that everybody is able to see the slides if you're running from your computer, and that you're able to hear each other. If you think you might be muted, you may need to press *6 during the meeting. But also the other thing is we are recording, just heads up to all of our co-hosts and hosts.
Much appreciated, Evelyn. So today there's a long list of names. There's always a long list of names, but there's certainly more, I think, on this slide than usual. Today's effort really took a team over the last 6 months. And so that's the names that are reflected here. So I'm Rachel Sanderson. I work at Capital Region Planning Commission. I'm the Region 7 Watershed Coordinator. Kim Marisek, our Director of Planning, also had a hand in putting together what you'll see today, as well as the governance packet materials from before. Dr. Thomas Douthit with LSU has been an incredible partner in this work with us, as well as his students, Lindsay Lamanna and Victoria Wynn. And then, as always, we have Evelyn Campo and Nicolette Jones and Bradley Spiegel with us from OCD, who have also been extremely supportive in our efforts here in Region 7. If we can go to the next slide, Evelyn. And just a note, y'all, I'm not going to be the person who's facilitating this discussion today. I'm going to get us through the intro and the closeout, but everything else in between is going to be facilitated by our really amazing partners. So today we'll go through introductions and meeting logistics, governance models and functions, which everybody should have a packet. I'm going to put the link to that packet in the chat pod very soon. We're going to go through breakout groups to discuss those specifically and hear some feedback from y'all. We're also going to talk about deal breakers and makers, and we'll get a little bit more explicit about what that means soon. And then, as always, we have the public comment period and the meeting closeout. So we can go next, Evelyn. Thank you. And then one more. So as Evelyn said earlier, we are going to be recording this meeting. That's so that people who are not here today can actually view it later on, or if you want to look at it again, feel free to do so. It also adheres to all Louisiana open meetings requirements, so it's observable to the public. There's an opportunity for public comments, although today we also have an opportunity for folks who are not regional steering committee members to engage in a way besides the public comment period. So we'll have those breakout groups. All right, next. And we'll do roll call in just a minute. We do ask that if you're comfortable, we would really love to see everybody's faces. Especially during this time where things are really virtual. It's really nice to be able to see other people's faces. And it's really helpful to the discussion as well. So we encourage everybody, if you're able, make sure that your video camera is on. Please stay off mute unless you have something that you're about to say. If you forget to go off mute or something and we're hearing some background noise, we might mute you with love, but that does not mean that you cannot unmute at another time. All right. Next slide, Evelyn. As a reminder, the goals of the Regional Steering Committee are to develop a long-term governance structure and to identify projects to recommend for funding due June 2021. So we spent a long time focusing on the build out of really the provisional governance recommendation, which is what's gonna be like the final document that we're submitting that says, hey, this is how we want our governance structure to look. We do know now that that is due to OCD by January 31st of 2021. So we're making quite a bit of progress on it. And today marks a milestone meeting. We've been working up to this point for 6 months. So it's really exciting to be here. All right, next slide, Evelyn. A couple of quick updates. One of these we talked about during our last meeting, and y'all might see me shift in my chair a little bit. I need to just cave and buy a new one. But if I sit in it for too long, my legs get a little stiff. So One thing that we mentioned last time is we are putting in an application that is due today, today at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, a NOAA Restore grant for a planning grant called Building Tools for Coastal Hazard Mitigation, decision-making that incorporate multi-criteria water resource externalities through benefit cost analysis. Basically what that means is we're really thinking about the ways in which in the future, the project selection process can also incorporate and be more in alignment with the mission and values, and also incorporate other external costs and benefits that maybe we haven't considered before. So we're really excited about that, and we'll keep everybody posted. One additional quick update that is something that is new. I tried to call as many of the steering committee members as I could. I think I called everybody, but maybe didn't get a chance to have a conversation with everybody. So hopefully it's not too big of a surprise, but we are going to be doing work with Georgetown Climate Center. They reached out to us a few months ago. Specifically, they sent an email to me and asked, basically saying, hey, we would like to work with Region 7. We see the work that's been going on. And we have some funding to be able to support that work. So this work requires no investment other than time from Region 7, and specifically, that'll be time from myself in terms of staff time, as well as some other members of a planning team. But essentially what we'll be doing is working with them to develop a toolkit that focuses on the intersection of land use planning and development and affordable housing. So really trying to connect the dots between those two things and think about what are some strategies that can be laid out in terms of land use planning, zoning, and development that are at the intersection of that. And what does that look like in a toolkit that can be used by parish staffers, planners, and other folks as well. The scope of work that's pending, and we will certainly let people know once we have more information. All right, next slide, Evelyn. So this is the time when I pass it over to Chuck and Ross, but just really quickly, just thank you. This is a milestone meeting. We've done a lot of work to get here, y'all. We did this together as a team, which I think is really important. And I think it's also really important to keep in mind, no matter what we make, it might not be perfect, but we are doing something that is going to end up being better than what we've done in the past. That is the goal. So thank you for getting us to this point. All right, Chuck and Ross, what do y'all got to say?
I'm just excited. You know, Chuck and I meet with y'all in advance, and you know, we kind of go over everything, all the background data, all the research that's put in, and Region 7 is definitely lucky to have the team that we do. So always appreciate the help that goes in. You know, so much work that goes on in the background. We see it obviously when we have these meetings, but again, I'm very excited about what we have to accomplish today and in the next couple of months. So ready to get started, Chuck.
Yeah, so, you know, I feel that I pretty much just show up and Rachel and her team makes us look good, you know, like we're doing something. But the real work occurs with Rachel and the OCD team and the rest of the team that I don't really know about so much. But, you know, this is where the rubber meets the road. So this is what we're here for from the beginning, and to come up with a governance model. So pretty excited about this part. And I'll just say that I'm excited about our meeting on Thursday as well with Natural Channel Design.
Yes, and don't forget about that meeting, y'all. We have a special line item towards the end of the meeting for the closeout, where we will bring up that Natural Channel Design meeting again, and we'll also send y'all the link to make sure people get registered. All right, Evelyn, can we go to the last slide? That's mine, I think. All right, as always, we're going to do a quick roll call here just to make sure that we do have quorum, and just to see who's on the line. So do we have Mike Enlow and or Ron Savoy with Ascension Parish?
Hello, Mike Enlow here.
Hey, Mike, you doing good today?
Doing well. How are you all?
Doing so good. Could be a little warmer, but not much to complain about.
I understand. Thanks.
Thanks.
Rachel, I'm seeing Ron is on as well, just so you can note that.
Thanks, Evelyn. What about Tom Stevens and or Fred Rayford with EDR, East Baton Rouge? Not hearing from them, but we'll keep an eye out, see if they're joining us a little bit late. James Stewart with East Louisiana. I think you're on the line, aren't you?
Yes, ma'am, I am. James Stewart here.
Yeah, you doing good today?
No, pretty good. How about y'all?
Good. It's so nice to see your face. It's been a while.
Hey, James.
Thank you, thank you, thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
We know you wear many hats, so thank you for being here. It is much appreciated. Do we have John Clark with Iberville? Okay, I'm not hearing John, but we will keep an eye out, see if he's joining us late today. Do we have Mark Harrell and or Steve Kistler with Livingston Parish? Okay, do the same thing for them. Earl, I think I heard your voice earlier, right?
Yep, I'm here.
Thanks, Earl. You are always here and it's much appreciated. Major Coleman and or Jeremy Williams.
Major.
Hey, Major.
Major's here.
Good to hear your voice. You doing good?
You too. Oh, yes, I'm doing good. Thank you.
Good, good. Perfect. All right. What about Ryan Donahue and or Ryan LaRousse with St. James? Okay, we'll see if we can catch them when they come on. Devin, I think you're on the line with us, aren't you?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm here.
Cool. Nice to see you, Devin, as always. Thank you for joining us today. Ross, we heard you earlier. Can you speak up so that we can account for you formally?
I am here.
Thanks, Ross. Do we have Bridget Bailey and or Melissa Cowart with Tangipahoa today?
This is Bridget. I'm here.
Hey, Bridget. I hope you enjoyed your vacation. I received an out of office email. Hopefully you're well rested.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Glad to have you. Do we have Bobby Joe Breland and or Alex Sumrall with Washington? Okay. I'm not hearing them, so we'll see if they come on later. Gary Migo and or Emily Cobb. Do we have y'all on the line?
Yeah, this is Gary. I'm here.
Hey, Gary. How are you today?
I'm doing all right so far.
Good. Let's hope that continues the rest of the day.
Right.
Do we have Dietmar Richier and or Larry Bankston with Amy River Basin Commission on the line? Oh, I see Dietmar.
I think I saw. Oh, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Evelyn.
I thought I had seen Larry come in, but now I'm scrolling.
Wait, I see Dietmar on the participant list. Maybe he's unable to come off mute.
I saw Dietmar.
Hey, Dietmar,
Okay.
how are you?
I had a hard time getting the sound on. I don't know what's going on. So yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. If you have any other tech issues, Dietmar, put it in the chat pod and we'll get somebody on it to address it. Just let us know. Do we have Karen Zito and or Diane Baum?
Yes, this is Karen Zito.
Hey, Karen, hope you're doing good today.
Doing well, thank you.
Perfect. And we know Chuck's on the line, but can you make it formal for us?
Sure. There I am.
Perfect. And then Ronnie Carter and or Kim Coates. Are either of y'all on the line? Oh, I see Kim Coates in the participant.
I'm here,
list.
Rachel.
Hey, Kim.
I'm here. Hey.
You doing good?
Yes, thank you.
Good, good. Okay. Well, now it is time for me to be quiet and take a back seat and be the note taker for today. So take it away, Evelyn.
All right. Thanks so much, Rachel. I just want to make sure everybody knows kind of from the outset, we're going to go through a couple slides today, and y'all know how Zoom is. You know, if you have a question, if you feel the need to chime in, like, you know, don't hold back. We have the chat function. We have a lot of us kind of in the background monitoring Zoom. So I want to make sure that if something is confusing that you let me know. Same thing with all of our speakers and hosts and co-hosts today. So I just want to reiterate kind of why we're looking at the things that we're looking at today, right? And one thing I do want to also just mention is we don't have to be perfect, right? The goal here is to make things better, right? And so I think that everyone in this group can definitely say that that's what they've been engaged in the past couple of months, right? And so thank you so much for your ongoing efforts. And again, you know, we're looking to how can we have capacity as a region to do watershed management, right? And that's what this governance question is all about. And again, thank you everyone for chiming in kind of earlier this year about what our values are. And, you know, I think that we should just maintain that's going to guide some of our work, right? And I love this analogy. Remember, this is gumbo, right? So like everybody has their special thing that they can bring to the recipe. And it doesn't have to be perfect the first time, but it gets good over time, right? Here we go. Okay, so y'all can see kind of our timeline here, just reiterating where we've been and where we are right now. And some of the content you're going to see today, I want to make sure that you're aware, you know, this is still a very deliberative discussion, right? I would still say a lot of this is very much in motion. You know, even though we've had quite a few meetings to this point, we are not yet at the point where we have a written recommendation from the group, you know, that's going to be a provisional recommendation. We're getting closer to that, right? And so let's just walk through some of these dates. You know, July through November, you're seeing that we've had a lot of meetings where we did polls and we kind of went around round robin and everybody give input on some ideas for like the work, right, that's going to comprise this coalition. And then, you know, we've all, I think, come up with some ideas from that, right? I've heard from this group lots of really great ideas that our facilitators have written down through this process. And so you're going to see some of that reflected today in this discussion. So this references a whiteboard session, right, that CRPC and LSU have done to kind of try to synthesize all the cyber feedback that we've been getting. And then, of course, you know, those of us with OCD have also been thinking the same thing as we go through all the different regions, right? We're going across the state, listening to a bunch of different meetings, which is fabulous. And we're hearing, you know, there are some common elements, right, between some of the regions. There are some sort of repeated calls maybe for the regions to have one similar component or, you know, coordinate with the state in a similar way, right? Things like that. So you'll see we'll be kind of diving into that too in this meeting and the next meeting. And then taking us back to like, what is going to be the written recommendation itself, right? That is kind of the end goal of this chunk of work that we're doing. And so we'll speak to that later on in the slideshow too, but we do need to eventually come to a consensus, but it doesn't have to be the final decision. And I think that's an important thing to just remind yourself of, right? Just because it's a provisional recommendation doesn't mean that you're locked into it, but you're sharing your vision with where you think this coalition could go. And then just recalling also the 4 R's, right? Dr. Dosent has really, I think, helped this group and helped across the state. You remember he was actually in a webinar that went statewide at a certain point. He's helped all of us kind of envision, well, what are the right questions to ask as you set up a watershed coalition? And so I think that that has been very helpful to kind of, okay, we have these concepts out here. How do we turn them into an action that we take? And then just to kind of speak to the larger context of what we're working in, I think this is a really good visual for kind of what's around us, right? We're working right now in Region 7, but we all know that our actions, you know, also interact with federal agencies and federal rules, and also with the role of the state, right? I mean, all of this is within the Watershed Initiative, right, which has a Watershed Council at the state level. It includes state agencies. And I think we all really have come to recognize the interrelatedness, right, between the local roles, the potential regional roles, and the state and federal roles in watershed management. And so, you know, I think that we should also keep in mind, as we answer questions about what the coalition looks like, there are going to be some questions that I think we have to answer about, well, how do we empower that format consistent with what the other watershed regions are doing? You know, how do we communicate with the state? And I think that part of the question to this group is, what do you want to see from the state, right? How does the state best support your vision? So don't hold back on those topics. You know, don't keep that to yourself, and then we wish we had talked about it. And so that's what this is getting at, right? What support do you need from the state? And how do your policy and program needs interact with those in this kind of ecosystem? And then just a few more things that I think that we should just kind of lay the groundwork here. You know, we are part of a program that provides funding for capacity building. That's a lot of the reason why we're all here today. And, you know, I think we should all think about, well, what does the future of our capacity look like? You know, what kind of funding is necessary to set up this coalition in a way where we have the right people with technical expertise, right, to get this work done, so that we're not just setting goals and then seeing what happens, right? And, you know, I think that a lot of you have been very integral in some conversations about model storage, right? And what the LWI models mean to this region. And so I just want to make sure that we're also holding that in mind as we talk more about what are the roles, right? And how we're gonna move our standards and our mitigation and our resilience forward. And so I want to make sure that I am checking the chat. I think Dr. Joseph is going to join us to walk through a few other kind of stage setting details here.
Hi, Evelyn, how are you? So I'm just gonna type to you privately next every time we wanna move forward, so then I'll have control. And if you can do that, great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Just a reminder, I'm Thomas Douthit from the College of Coast and the Environment at Louisiana State University, Department of Environmental Sciences. And I've been doing some support and background research that we hope will support the long-term efforts that you're making, both when you get to the point of making a regional watershed plan, also in thinking about how to coordinate and set up governance at the regional level here around this important issue. And together with CRPC, we've sort of brainstormed 3 different potential sort of structures or skeletons of a governance model. And of course, the eventual the relationship with the state, the eventual text that, you know, for creating the organization is going to be a lot of it. But this is just sort of a larger vision that we're going to help present today. And we want to present them as neutrally as possible to you to get your feedback and perspectives. We want to communicate that you, as the steering committee, are the ultimate deciders of what you envision for the region. And so we want to think about these as points to frame a discussion, points of comparison, and not anything set in stone. You can mix and match and change. And for that reason, we've had this doll, because as you'll see, there are different layers. And if you refer to the governance package, there's sort of different layers of how we propose potential organizations at each level. And one thing you'll know that is common with all of them, and I think it's something to be decided by the group also in the future, is that there's going to be a need probably for some administrative body to accompany the group. And that's called the regional coordinating entity. And so that'll be sort of common at each step. And understanding the role and who's going to fulfill that role will be another step in the process. But we thought that understanding the sort of larger vision to about how to organize ourselves So region could be a first step in making those more detailed decisions down the road. So if we could go to the next slide, Evelyn. Can I go to the next slide?
So I'm going to click through a couple slides to illustrate the concept that you just explained, which is kind of, you know, these models have a bunch of different components, right? And you can kind of mix and match, right? So you can see the little character in the slides. You can put them in different things, you know? And I think what you're getting at, Dr. Joseph, and elaborate further is, you know, what we're doing today isn't to say that like one model has to be exactly as it's written, and that's the best case scenario, right? I think you're getting at, you can kind of pick and choose what qualities work for this group.
Great. So the first model, which is the green model or Model A, which is in some ways roughly based on kind of existing MPO or regional structures. And what you'll notice in this, so I'm going to go from top to bottom in each of them very briefly, is that this is organized around a voting membership at the regional level from the parish presidents or their designees, and also municipal mayors of cities that are larger than 10,000 residents. And the reason we did this was sort of to limit the size, and also for places that would probably have resources and interest in participating because of their sort of autonomous municipal functions. The idea in this model is that they'd be voting on recommendations by committees. And the committees we have split envisioned at a second level where there would be two 17-member advisory committees. One, a technical advisory committee, and a second, a community advisory committee. The community advisory committee is comprised of individuals who have affiliations with community-based organizations that represent low and middle income communities as stipulated by CDBG funding. And they're not people who that have elected or government agency positions that are affiliated with issues that the Watershed Commission deals with. The technical committee is comprised of people like floodplain managers, of maybe civil engineers, that type of technical expertise, planners, hydrological engineers. And the regional coordinating entity, which is currently CRPC, coordinates the regional activities, provides technical assistance. And you'll see here that there are 3 advisory committees. And the idea is that there will be a projects committee, a planning and policy committee, and data and modeling committee. And most of these would be broadly expert driven, and they'd be also practitioner driven. And they would be identifying projects, planning, and data modeling, filtering that through to the regional coordinating entity, which then be presenting ideas to the technical advisory committee and the community advisory committee. And then final larger decisions would be taken by the voting membership, again, comprised of local elected officials. Of course, that would be a two-way street, right? Both from elected officials to the committees, to the project thing, and with the regional coordinating committee. And the idea here is that you would have a coordinating body that could also provide professional, stable staffing to support each of the committees in their work. And for each of these, we've also created a sort of a broad pros and cons table to help think about some other questions. And you can see that in the governance package, which Rachel has linked here. So looking at governance model B, big picture takeaway comparison here is that instead of a board, a voting membership that is primarily composed of elected officials, there are elected representatives from different sort of groupings of the Huck 8 scale. So that would be sort of the Western grouping of 1, 2, and 3. So the Amite, then the Felicianas, another one from 5, 6, and 4, which would be Tickfall, Tangipahoa, and some of the river parishes. And then 8, 9, and 7, Washington Parish, Pearl River, those Huck 8s over there. There are also members from the advisory committee and potentially a member for Mississippi. You know, as we'll see, our borders go beyond Mississippi. And so our watershed issues necessarily also go beyond Louisiana, they go into Mississippi as well. And a major difference between this one, sort of two different options to think about, is that the advisory committee, instead of being split up between a technical advisory committee and a community advisory committee, kind of merges that and includes sort of a set number of community voices, non-technical, non-elected voices, to sort of bridge some of the gaps that we've seen traditionally in bringing in non-technical people into conversations about flood management. And so this advisory committee works with 3 more mixed group. Again, we can sort of think about this as another way of envisioning sort of the more detail focused working groups, where you have practitioners who are both community members, but also planning practitioners, flood managers, other practitioners, administrators from the region who identify challenges and opportunities. And they work with groups that are designers, which are maybe from the design professions, researchers, and to think about solutions. And that's shared together and then shared back with, again, this regional coordinating entity. And as within the first model, the regional coordinating entity provides staffing support when needed, technical support as resources permit, and as funding permits, to the voting membership, the advisory committee, and then the 3 practitioner research and design subcommittees. Let's go to Model C. Model C was in part inspired by a comment that we had in one of our last conversations. And here the voting membership is broken down into 9 smaller hydrological unit code areas at Huck 8s. And the members are selected and voted on from each of these committees. And these committees could be constituted different ways, but they could be constituted through elected officials. They could also be done through other representational processes, much like the steering committee or drainage districts, or different mechanisms are set up. This would be sort of a detail to be considered further down the line. And these committees would all operate and do planning and set priorities for their basin, but also within a regional context. They work with the regional coordinating entity, and then their voting membership, right, would be in some ways representational of the entire region. Some drawbacks and strengths of each of these models that we've sort of seen is that, of course, having 9 different committees in this model is potentially administratively more expensive, and you can go back to some of the cost estimates in our governance packet there. The Model B is strong on incorporating community voices, and Model A has this really strong component of incorporating sort of traditional local decision makers. And coordinating local authority is always going to be a key aspect of changes in the watershed space, because it involves infrastructure, land use, and many other functions, which oftentimes have been very local in nature. So these are sort of the tables where we have some of the trade-offs here. I've mentioned some of them. We have some of the voting trade-offs for Model A, which includes political leadership. Model B is independent expertise, maybe a voice for Mississippi. And Model C has a sort of regional coverage focus. So there's not one watershed that feels it's left out, but of course, then you have to have 8 or 9 different functioning committees for your region, and that can be hard to get quorum, hard to staff, hard to have resources. So I'm not going to go into all the trade-offs right now, but I want to bring that to your packet. I think also I'm not going to go into the trade-offs because I assume that you as practitioners or experts in the region have your own ideas, which might be better than the ones that we've brainstormed in that, but that's just sort of a starting point. So if we can go to the, Rachel right now is linking where these are. And so we're going to go to the functions. And you might think about each of these models in terms of these functions, right? Looking at these trade-offs, right? So programming, that's providing oversight of watershed related programming, directing water related work programming, planning, and understanding that this is a capacity building activity. Which model do we think best fits with that? Planning, technical assistance to local entities, to develop flood management plans, providing oversight for regional planning processes, and directing these efforts. Do you think this is best done through one sort of larger municipally influenced entity, a more community-driven model, or one that's organized around the Huc 8 watersheds themselves? We can go to the next. Another issue is the models and data. Would the models and data be, how are they best coordinated into work? Is it done through a hub or a clearinghouse? Is it to support other activities in the region? And of course, many of these questions go beyond some of this structure. They're going to have to be involving what's the regional coordinating entities going to be. But the structure is important because it's going to, in some ways, dictate the way that the regional steering committee, coordinating entity, excuse me, might work. And so that's something you want to have in consideration. And then finally, there are questions of projects. So if we're going to be making decisions about projects, we know that there are projects that have regional impact. We know that water sometimes flows across Huc 8 boundaries, but a lot of our planning and a lot of our original modeling is done at that Huc 8 level. What's the best way? What's the best scale to organize? And then the other question is representation. We know that there are questions about housing instability, about health, about serious impacts that happen with flooding. That's why we're all here, and that's why this issue motivates us so much. And we also know that it is, in many ways, a very technical field, right? There are laws of science that dictate hydrology, and engineering is always going to be a core aspect of anything we do. But we can see from our range of plans that we've gone through and looked at the actors that are actually mentioned as participating in the plans, that there can be a big mix of who's participating in the plans. We can also see that community groups and NGOs tend to be a very small voice in our planning process. Now, much of that has to do because of municipal and parish functions, the key importance of state, federal, and local agencies. But we also might want to think about, if we want to get buy-in at the regional level, how do you bring in community and local voices into this issue? So finally, in our next slide, going back to this question of representation. Sometimes when you're thinking about fairness or representation in programs, there's concepts of fair participation and not having disparate impacts. So there's other ways of framing this, as the Georgetown Law Center has done, and this comes from a broad framework from the Environmental Justice Executive Orders from the White House, is to have procedural equity. Are your processes fair? Do people have access to them, right? You don't want this to be an ivory tower. Sorry, I'm saying that coming from academia. You also want to have substantively equitable outcomes, right? And the idea is that if you have better procedural equity, you're going to have better outcomes, because those people whose voices might sometimes be forgotten when we're thinking about how we manage water because they're not traditional technical voices, they're going to be able to represent themselves. But that's not necessarily always the case, right? Because you might have to actually think about that and bring that into the values of your project selection and your organization. And to do that, and when you're thinking about these models, consider what your values are. How do you think government should work? How do you think watershed management should work? What do you think are the important goals for Region 7? So take those in consideration as you're thinking about these models. And with that, I think we can move on to the next step, which is going to be group level brainstorming around these. I don't know if we want to open up any questions or just move into the breakouts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Joseph. I wonder if anyone, I know that was a lot, so I wonder if anyone has questions that are jumping out to them. We have about 4 minutes before we have to transfer to stay on time, so we need to go into our breakout group soon. But if something occurs to you that you want to ask a question on, please join in.
Yeah, well, can I make a comment? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, look, I'm sorry, I was not very participant in a couple of weeks ago. I had a health situation. But I just want to say this. I'm looking from the point of view of this basin, the Emmett River Basin and the Emmett River Basin Commission, which has been in existence for 30 years. And I would like to, the closest that it comes to my way of thinking, the experience we had, is the Model C, maybe. Because, in other words, to set it up so that each basin will have, like we are, a commission. You can call it whatever you want to. And because that is where the decision has to be made at that level. The people in Tangipahoa really have absolutely nothing to do with the people in the Emmett River Basin, Baton Rouge. They're completely separated geographically. And, but then we are amalgamating this at a higher level with the participation of this whole region. You develop projects at one level here, at a level here. All of that then has to be filtered through that committee. And I have a little bit of a hard time understanding how the membership of Baton Rouge is going to vote on a project in Tangipahoa. I mean, we would be neutral basically, because the people in Tangipahoa Parish, or the parishes of the Tangipahoa River Basin, let's say, they're the ones that developed all of the priorities, and they come up with what they think needs to be done, because they really know what's going on over there. And this happens for every single watershed if you want to talk about a Hawk 8. And so I would like to see us to kind of think about that. And basically, I'm not using I'm trying to say use the Emmett River Basin as a model, no. But we are structured, I think, very, very well. We have been successful, not as we would like to be, because we never got very much funding, but funding is available. You know, things will get much better. That's the point I want to make, is I have some problems with that. The Region 7 is too big for one group to do it. And I know where the idea comes from. It comes from transportation planning, because it comes from there, but that is a completely different situation, because in these MPOs, in these metropolitan planning organizations, you have many parishes and they work together there, and they have this big executive committee that makes decisions. But that is roads, and they impact each other. The roads go from one end to the other. Watersheds are different. Especially Hawk 8, the water does not go over the ridge line of those watersheds unless we would have a biblical flood, so to speak. So they're very much independent. The dynamics of floods and everything else is the same, but are independent. And so I think more emphasis needs to be put on the watershed and the organization of the watershed, and less to the centralized management, which is nothing else than trying to get people together to sit around the table, to be very honest. That is my input. how it comes out, let's see.
I hear that. Thank you, Dietmar, for joining in here on this. And I appreciate that input that the local expertise, it really is important. That's what I'm hearing come through your comment. I wanna go ahead and transition us to our breakout groups where we're gonna have even more of a chance to discuss what we like or what we don't like about each model. But I think it's really helpful to make sure that we run through, like, how does each watershed affect each other? I think, that's what we're here to do. So let's talk through a few logistics here real quick. We are about to be sorted into rooms, okay? So you might see some funny things happening on your screen. It's gonna say, you're getting put into a breakout room. I think there's a button to accept that that's gonna happen. Brad here, our Zoom facilitator, is going to help with any tech questions that you may have. If you're worried that you're not able to hear, or if you're having any issues like that, he's gonna help with that. But we're gonna break out into these 3 rooms. And then you're gonna have some facilitators talk to you, ask some questions. We're gonna spend 15 minutes on each model, but you can stay in your room where you are gonna go, right? So you don't have to move around. Your facilitators are gonna move around to you. So with that, Brad, go ahead and divide us up.
Sounds good. Thank you, Evelyn. And I will broadcast to you when each breakout room will be 15 minutes. Well, yeah, there's going to be 15 minutes per group when the facilitators will switch. So you all will stay in the same room, but I will tell you when there's 5 minutes left in the session, and then you're going to switch to a different model. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, so you all should have received your breakout. Randy, do you need help? Hey, Karen. Karen, let me know if you need me to put you back in a breakout room. If not, no worries.
Yes. Wait, am I supposed to put join breakout room? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Don't
Doing
be
that
sorry.
now.
It's a weird it's like virtual reality.
Okay. Thank you. Going back in.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
elected officials and they belong to an NPO. I mean, I think they kind of get it.
Hello, can you hear me?
that we're getting here. I mean, it's, obviously, we all have our hearts on
Hey, Darby. Hey, Cade. Darby, let me know. There's going to be a 15-minute breakout session that's still occurring. So if you want to go, I can put you into one of the breakout sessions if you'd like. Same. Hey, Cade. Can you hear me, Cade? So everyone's in breakout sessions. I can put you in one if you'd like. How do I do that, Cade? Here we go. Okay. Okay, Cade, this is your moment of divine truth. Do you want to go into 1, 2, or 3? Okay, here you go. Sign 2, 3.
That's so great, y'all. Okay, I'm seeing most people back in the room, the main meeting room now. I'm going to go ahead and put up a slide. We have a couple more things to get through as a group collectively. Okay, y'all should be able to see a screen now that says breakout groups report out. I want to go ahead and kind of go around the room to those of you who were facilitators and note takers, so you can kind of summarize what you were hearing on your model. So starting with the green model.
Hi, everybody. The green model. I think there are, there's a divergence, I'd say, of perspectives on this. And I mean, I think there's some confusion also because of the interplay of functions. And so there's some concerns about, are we setting up a regulatory body? And there's some red flags raised about that and concerns. There are questions that people think that if there are going to be decisions about planning or processes, will that getting buy-in from municipal decision makers is important, but some people say, well, they don't always feel represented by those particular actors, especially maybe in some of the growing unincorporated areas. And there's also considerations of how we set it up, which municipalities, where are cutoff lines, and some of those details that I think would need to be ironed out. But I think people think that one potential strength is that there is a need to have sort of direct local elected official buy-in in some way, whether it be at this level or another.
That's helpful. Thank you. I want to jump right into the orange model, and then we're going to move to the blue very quickly. And then after that, we're going to have some more open discussion. So, and Rachel, feel free to jump in. I know you're taking notes on the orange model. I'm just going to repeat a couple things that I heard pretty consistently. One is just looking at the total number of people involved. I think we did hear that comment kind of in multiple groups that let's just make sure it doesn't get, you know, unwieldy to where there's a lot of people involved, which may be kind of administratively complicated. One second point was that because Model B includes a diverse group of actors that could potentially have input into decision making, it includes like community members, technical experts, that was seen as a very good quality of this model, that would be an asset to moving the watershed planning within the region forward. One other thing I heard, which I think Dr. Joseph just kind of reiterated with his too, was just caution against having a model that limits local participation, or maybe just the participation of those who may have worked for a parish or municipality, but perhaps don't anymore and still want to become included in the process. Rachel, did you want to add anything to that? All right, how about our blue model? What did we hear about the blue model?
I think that there were some comments that the blue model organized by Huckett Watersheds made sense in terms of project considerations and reviews, but that having 10 to 12 members per Huckgate might also be too high of a number to manage successfully. There were some other comments that that maybe it might be helpful to better define the membership on those different HUC level committees, and also maybe limit the number to prevent redundancy and burnout, where maybe some representatives are on multiple Huckgate committees because their parish goes through multiple Huckgates. And then finally, one suggestion was to blend this model with another and create another, a 10th subcommittee that has that technical and citizen representation, and because that isn't necessarily accounted for in this model. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay to add any other notes that I may have missed.
Yeah, I think that was most of it. Just one thing that stood out was making sure we have technical representation and citizen representation, and not just those political figures that are representing each subcommittee.
Thanks so much, y'all. That was really helpful. I'm going to move us into an open discussion. So before we jump further into kind of what we just talked about with the models, one thing I want to highlight for the group is a lot of what we just talked about in the breakout room are who's basically like the board, right, for the coalition. That's what a lot of these models are built around, like who's voting, right, and what kind of expertise are they getting in that vote. I want to kind of highlight another part of this that you saw recurring in these models, which is, you don't just have a board, you have staff for that board. And so I do want to kind of bring up a point of discussion, which is, well, how do we see that part of this playing out, right? I mean, right now, we are so lucky to have CRPC facilitating this regional steering committee. And I think we've had a great year doing this. And so I want to hear from the group, how do we see that potentially continuing, or, how do we see kind of the build out of the staff that serves each one of these models? Do you see that as CRPC continuing to play the role as a facilitator, or do you see it as, what's another option? Is there a new sort of staff role that you carve out as part of this model? What's the setup involved? So I want to kind of hear from the group on that. And one thing, just before I know we're all going to chime in here, one thing I want to just make sure to cover too is, like, this isn't something that you're locked into. None of what we're discussing today is something that is carved in stone, right, and is like a vote at the end of this call. This is all kind of hypothetical.
Hey, this is Earl. I would very, very much like to see the regional planning commissions stay as the coordinating agencies. My parish is in 3 different watersheds, and we've got 3 different regional planning commissions doing this coordination for us. It was really nice that they were able to come in, because this, if you guys remember the scramble right at the beginning, that they was, just trying to figure out who in the heck's going to do this. So they were able to come in. They were a group that my elected officials and my bosses and my boss's bosses were all comfortable with, so that, they were able to take on that job. I would also not like to see a new administrative process or policy or group created just because of the overhead cost involved in that. I mean, adding a person or staff to an RPC is one thing. Creating an entire new entity that's got to have office space and insurance and all of that stuff and payroll. And I just don't see that as the best use of any of funding that's available. It just takes away from our total funding, and uses it in administrative costs. And I just kind of hate when that happens. So, okay, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Earl. That's really helpful to have that perspective. I'm looking down the list. I know a lot of us may be on mute because we rejoined the room. So if anyone wants to come off mute and share, go right ahead.
I agree 100% with Earl. I think, the planning commissions have a long history of doing work in the state, and plus they have all the background information on this particular initiative. So, coming along with a different coordinator, you run the risk of different perspectives and trying to push things in different directions. And, I think that would be at a most inopportune time for that to happen. So I think I'm with leaving the planning commissions as the coordinators. I can't think of anybody else right now that would be better suited.
Hey, this is Gary. I'm already a member of the Regional Capital Region Planning Commission, so I'm okay with that. And I was looking at your HUC maps, actually. This is related to something previously, but there's actually nobody in HUC 1 that's in a different region. So there'll only be 2 through 9.
That's helpful, Gary. Yeah, some of those hucks are kind of an odd shape because of the topography and the water body. So thank you for filling that out. That's helpful.
Yeah, number 1's actually on the other side of the river. I think Point Coupee and Concordia maybe, but they're not in our region.
Thanks, y'all, for thinking on this. I wonder, I think I just want to kind of preview what might come next, right? This group has done a great job looking at these governance models, and you're going to want to think about, like, what are the steps to implement all the great things we just said, right? And so thinking about who is going to be the coordinating entity is a big part of that. I wonder, does anyone else want to kind of jump in on this before we dive right back into our graphics here in a minute?
I'd like to mention something on team building going forward. And thinking back about some of the most successful teams I've been on, the members took the Myers-Briggs test and the Parker team player test, and they were looked at, which I helped evaluate. And we put together a team that was functional, based on profile also. And that worked so smoothly, no hit on anybody, but it really makes a major difference if you start building teams from scratch, where you're going to have a group that can get consensus and challenge at the same time. And just looking forward, as far as team building goes, maybe other projects or whatever, it would be fantastic if this was done on a state level as far as getting things done.
That's a great point. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Yeah, I see a ditto comment here. I'm seeing that's actually in response to another comment we have. Let me call this out because it's in the chat. I see from Karen that she says CRPC has demonstrated they can create and implement excellent collaborative strategic progress. Ooh, that's a mouthful, Karen, with a diverse group. So thank you, Karen. And I'm hearing here too in this comment, they've captured the feedback. So that's great. That's an important quality, for sure. And then I see, let me scroll back up. I'm seeing another, this is a great question from Larry. Is this going to be proposed legislation? So that's part of what we need to think about within this group and within the other RSCs in the state, right? So once we kind of nail down this provisional recommendation, which is, our next meeting, I think we're going to work a lot on that. We have to figure out, okay, now that you've set this vision, does it need to be enabled in legislation to have certain authorities to execute what this group has said that they want to do. And part of that conversation, I think, has to do with, does it make sense to, for instance, have a piece of legislation that addresses all of the watershed regions and perhaps gives you like a menu of potential authorities that you can use to further your ends? You know, I think we do need to dive into that and see exactly what is needed. So thank you, Larry, for bringing that up. I'd like to hear from the group, kind of what are your thoughts on that? You know, what do you see as the authorities that, you know, I hear a lot of comments about, well, we need to, you know, coordinate with the state. I think that's definitely something that we'd be thinking about in those next conversations. But does anyone have further kind of questions or concerns about those authorities?
This is Rebecca. We had raised this in our breakout sessions because I noted, as others had, that there seems to be some crossover questions that seem to center on land use and planning and zoning type issues that I think are going to be consequential when it comes to getting down to diving into the details of this, that are going to raise eyebrows when you start talking to the city councils, metro councils, mayors, et cetera, of different areas, when you really start considering the conversation. So yeah, I mean, the question that I have asked in the breakout sessions, and I'll ask again, is, are you proposing this entity as a regulatory body or as a supportive planning entity who will be supporting cities, municipalities, et cetera? Because if you're proposing a body who will become a regulatory type entity like a DOTD, as opposed to a Capital Region Planning Commission type entity, I think that you're talking about apples and oranges at that point, and we probably need to have a serious discussion about that, because I feel like you're going to get pushback as soon as that differentiation is made.
That's a great point, and thank you so much for bringing this up. I know we have to move to our segment today about kind of comparing different qualities of the governance models, but I wanted to just pull up these slides as a refresher, just because we're talking about, you know, the next step in executing this. What are the functions that we kind of nail down, and what are the authorities needed to do those? So I just want to run through these as a quick refresher, and then I'm going to take us to a slide where we can start comparing those models, okay?
Hey, this is Earl. I would like to say that I 100% agree, because I think you're talking about two different authorization processes. If one's regulatory and one's more recommendation. The other thing I would also like to throw in is that it at least in my mind, my recommendation would also be based on the coordination between the different watersheds, just because I don't want to put my own parish in the point where it's got three different sets of regulations / rules that they're going to have to follow. It's just going to get weird.
I'm following you. And you know, I see another comment in the chat from Larry that I want to highlight to the group. And thanks y'all for bringing up kind of how does this work with the existing local jurisdictions. I think that's a great point. Larry says in the chat, you'll not be able to pass legislation that transfers any authority from the local government. I think, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, I think what I'm hearing from the functions that this group has laid out is not that this would displace any authority from local entities, but that this would build consensus and unite some functions that perhaps like aren't necessarily being done. We don't have, you know, these statewide models just yet, right? And, you know, for example, we don't have a regional planning body necessarily that's specifically oriented toward the watershed, you know, beyond this group. So I think what I'm hearing from y'all is that it wouldn't displace local authority as much as it would supplement those goals and unify planning. But jump in if someone is not seeing that same vision.
Evelyn, if that's the case, why don't we just scrap the word governance? These are not models of governance. These are models of providing advice and consultation.
That's a great point. And to the degree that the authority would be limited, I don't know that I've heard from this group that the regional coalition would only be providing advice, but more that it would have a specific role carved out. You know, I'm looking here at reviewing projects and serving as a conduit for grant funds. You know, some of those things may be a role where the region can incentivize certain things. I'd like to kind of hear from others where you see that level of authority.
I guess my question would be, how would it incentivize? This is Rebecca. I'm sorry. How do you envision it incentivize grant funds?
Well, I would say similar to what is in round one, there is a set of criteria by which those projects will be reviewed, and that, you know, they will be scored. And so I think that's one way that that is being done and may be done again in round two. Obviously, okay, we don't have funding for everything, but in the criteria, the scoring really gets into, you know, projects that are going to have adverse impacts on others as well. That's just one of the ways it looks at it.
Okay, so I guess that comes back to then the planning mechanism in.
Can I say something really quick, Dietmar?
Yes, please, Dietmar.
Okay, look, the problem I have is that you create this committee, okay? House, whatever regional agency, you guys saying it's going to be the Capital Region Planning Commission, it doesn't matter who it is. It's going to be consist of 23 people, depends on what model you look at. And now I overheard this the third time that we're going to review the projects. The committee is going to review the projects. The projects and the programs are evolved from the bottom, meaning at the watershed level. Like the gentleman from Tangipahoa, I understand his frustration. He's going to have 3 groups to deal with, but they're dealing with one watershed for that area. They're going to come up with projects. And so the Midway Basin, we have come up projects for the last 30 years. Then the TICFO, the Chefonta, each one of those, the people at the local level make the decision, we want to do these programs or projects. But then we have to go, we have a process right now, which is very much state and federally guided, because we need federal funds for many of these big projects. I'm talking about not small projects, but big projects. Does that mean then we come up with another project, a Darlington Reservoir project? Do we have to go then through this committee and request their approval by 23 people? We might have 6 people on the committee or 5. Does the 23 voting members will decide on that project? Are they going to decide on the project of Tangipahoa? Are they going to decide? At every occasion, the proponents of the basin are going to be a minority. I just want to see how that works. Who is going to approve what? Who is first? Who is second? Who is third? In other words, we develop projects at the regional level to the best of our abilities with the parishes and the cities and the towns. We address the big issue projects, not the small one, not the little drainage and not the little things like that. We work with Congress, our senators and representatives. We get legislation passed in Washington, get federal approval, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where is this approval process, this regional approval process in the step of decision-making, in the decision-making process? Where? At the beginning? It cannot be in the middle, because after you have done all your homework, getting federal funds, you don't want to have a regional agency, whoever it is, to say, oh, we don't believe that's a good idea after all. So are they going to be involved at the very beginning of the process, or where? How? I'm concerned with the voting.
Well, I can definitely understand that. And I will say that on a lot of those federal projects that, we get involved in all stages. So we review them at the beginning when they're conceptual and issue any comments. And then, you don't really know how it's going to turn out till you have a final design. And so then we have the opportunity to review them when there's a final design. So nothing of this I see that we're talking about is really much different than what we currently do. There is currently a review process by all the state resource agencies that are involved in any of these projects that involve federal funding. So I think this is particular to any funding provided by the Watershed Initiative, and perhaps, maybe for other projects it may be a more of an advisory. I don't know. But the scoring I was talking about was referring to projects that are seeking to obtain funding from the Watershed Initiative. And I'll stop there, and Evelyn or others can comment on if I'm wrong on any of that.
Well, thanks, y'all. I think you're bringing up important points about, the project pipeline, right? How a project goes from concept to funded and built is not necessarily just one specific linear path, right? There's lots of different opportunities for project funding. And within that, there's lots of different processes that happen at various different levels, local, state, and federal. So, I think y'all are addressing an important discussion here that has to do with project selection and what exactly is the role in the region in that process. I know that we are getting toward the end time of the meeting. So I want to go ahead and put us toward the closeout and public comment. But I think that you guys have given the group a lot of, good food for thought. If anyone has, any kind of closing thoughts, we can maybe do about 2 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and put us on that public comment screen, and we'll get started on that shortly after.
I have one quick thing. If you're talking about a separate funding, watershed and LWI funding versus every other kind of funding, I think you probably need to clarify that. So if you have LWI funding that's going to have to go through a separate approval process versus what we would pursue on any other project, I think that needs to be clarified, because I think you're confusing two processes potentially here, and that's making it more difficult for people to get their mind around.
Hey, and if I can ask some questions, we have any idea if the LWI funding will continue to be distributed to the regions in small amounts and big amounts at the state level like this first round is? Do we have any idea if it's going to stay like that? Because that would mean that, these committees will have direct say on some monies, but do we know that yet?
The LWI money, the way I see it, is a one-time money, 1.2 billion. Now, somebody clarify that for me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, y'all are bringing up some good questions. I would urge the group to think beyond the 1.2 billion, which is, constantly the thing that I try to remind people of, because you're right, it is one-time funds. It doesn't necessarily represent a cycle of funding to build projects from forever into eternity, right? And so I think that part of the challenge for this group is, not only how do you see yourself within the context of funds that are available now and processes that are happening now, how do you see yourself in the larger patchwork of state and federal funding? And how do you see yourself potentially, weighing in on what are the local jurisdictions going to ask for collectively, or what are they going to get behind collectively? And that's part of the role of planning. I know I'm seeing comments in the chat. I'm sure
Evelyn, this is Bob. If you're going to pursue mitigation projects and you want to define this as an entity that's going to help pursue federal funding for mitigation, it would be helpful to then specifically lay out pipelines of how this particular entity, if it's a governance entity, facilitates that funding. If it's FEMA mitigation dollars, how does this facilitate what currently happens in the pursuit of FEMA mitigation dollars? If it's core funded projects, how does this entity specifically facilitate the development of good core funded projects? If there's another source of federal funding for mitigation projects, how does it do that? If its function is basically land use and planning and mitigation of a reduction of adverse impacts as a result of growth and urbanization or poor construction projects, then okay, lay that out. But something has to be specifically laid out as to where you're targeting a specific supportive function. I don't think the supportive functions have been really spelled out so that these entities can be developed appropriately. And another really key thing is that these entities may need to look very differently if we do see a regional entity being needed for one of these pipelines of activity. Is it the same entity in Acadiana that it is on the North Shore, that it is on the South Shore, that it is up in North Louisiana? Maybe not.
Bob is entirely right, because when you start talking about hazard mitigation, that ties back to disasters. And I mean, are you guys going to have resources available at the immediate onset of a disaster? Because we're working that as soon as something happens. So that's, not something I feel like that may have even been considered at this point. That's a completely different life cycle from all of these other processes.
Yeah, and I think we've had some really great comments, y'all, and we are going to have to move on. Really, one thing that I wanted to say here that is hopefully clarifying is a lot of the things that y'all are bringing up is a part of what we're building out. I know that building things out in the midst of uncertainty is uncomfortable. There are a lot of things that we don't have answers to. But that is why we're engaging in this process, is to begin to answer questions. And by doing that, we've been engaging people in this process during the whole time. We haven't been going in the background and making things up and bringing them to y'all. This is directly from feedback. And I think with regards to if this is the 1.2 billion or not, the executive order that came out for the Louisiana Watershed Initiative that was put out by Governor John Bel Edwards existed before the 1.2 did. So the purpose of this effort is specifically to create programmatic as well as policy alignment around flood mitigation activities in the state. And one of the mechanisms that has been identified for doing that is by creating regional coalitions. So I hope that is helpful. We'll move into the public comment period. Evelyn, can you go to the next slide, and we'll take a couple minutes here, and then we'll do the closeout. So you can do public comments by inserting that information into the chat pod or by coming off mute. And anybody is allowed to do that, so please feel free.
So this is Chuck. I would like to say one thing real quick, and glad you brought up the issue, Rachel, about the initial executive order. But we got to remind why we're here, because that initial phase 1 report identified that the management of watersheds is done by multiple agencies and entities that don't really talk to one another. So a huge part of that is coordination. So while this may not be perfect, whatever we do here, I think, we're looking for consistency and coordination across the watersheds and different political boundaries.
I think everybody's on board with that. I think that's just one aspect of everything that's being discussed, though, and we probably need boxes around all the different aspects.
I would say this again, I emphasize this again, and that is, I think that we should, if these have been set up for the purpose of spending the $1.2 billion or whatever, what I don't want to happen is to create another layer of government, bureaucracy, or whatever you want to call it, through legislation on the basis of a one-time money. If we do that, we should be responsible enough, communally, all together, to figure out how something like that can be funded in the future. I hear the stories that, well, we don't know. Well, if we don't know, then we don't know. But I would be against the concept of having government create a structure and not knowing how is it going to be funded, because you create basically an artificial entity. And I disagree with that completely. That is me, Dietmar.
Well, I can agree with that 100%. And I will go back to what I always say in these situations, is that it's all dependent on the willingness of the people involved. So I think while we might not have all the answers now. There has to be a certain degree of faith, and that we need to have a general direction and agreement going forward. I don't think we can envision, having every specific scenario addressed, but I think as we have the same vision and goals, I think we can get there. The point is that we can plan on this and discuss this for years, but at some point we'll have to either decide to pull the trigger on it or not.
Wouldn't it be simpler to say that you're planning around that 1.2 billion one-time spend, that you're not going to implement legislation on it, and that what you're doing is assessing right now anything that falls outside of what's being planned for in other federal and state spending? I mean, just as a general kind of 40,000 foot take on it?
You know, if I could, y'all, I think it might be helpful to think about a conversation that has come up in a few of the other regions. And I just want to put this to the group as kind of to think about it, and we can talk about it in another meeting. Y'all are making a good point that a lot of the HUD funds we're dealing with now are, one-time funds. But I would encourage everyone to kind of take a step back and think about the fact that Louisiana has been pretty steadily, and especially in this region, has been pretty steadily in the business of working to reduce flood risk by building infrastructure projects, non-structural mitigation, what have you. A lot of that comes from the fact that we are in a cycle of, receiving damage from, weather events and then responding to it. So what I would just put to y'all is, sure, you may pull from one fund source right now to have this conversation, right? But this is a problem that we're not getting away from. And some of the other regions have thought about, well, what happens when we have the next Hurricane Katrina, right? Or the next Hurricane Laura? Do we need a regional structure in place to make good decisions so that we're not hurting each other? And that's been part of some of their discussions, just sharing that, but y'all go on ahead.
That's helpful.
I
Thank
agree.
you, Evelyn. We got to move on from the public comment section, y'all, because it is 3:30 right now. So Chuck and Ross, I might ask really quick, is it okay if we take a couple extra minutes, thinking 3 maximum?
Concerning.
So that we can get through the adoption of the meeting minutes and hear a quick update from our friends at Dewberry.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if you were extending the public comment. So yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. All right, next slide, Evelyn. Thank you. All right, so I think we got Sam Crampton or Jerry Daniels or perhaps both on the line. We got this slide specifically for y'all to talk about. So can y'all give us a quick update?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if Jerry's on the line. I didn't see a login, but so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sam Crampton with Dewberry. I'm the project manager for the Region 7 modeling effort. So currently we are underway with the task order 1, which is primarily doing our data research to see what data's out there and then to look at each region and come up with a recommended scope. So we're breaking the studies down into 3 levels of detail, high, medium, and low. Obviously, some of them areas in the rural parts of the state where there isn't a lot of flood risk, we're not going to do them in high detail. But whereas down further south than that, and areas where there's a lot more urbanization and flood risk, we will do that in more detail. So the key thing at the moment, we're just developing that scope. We're going to be submitting that for review and approval, hopefully next month. And so the key thing we're doing right now is you should have probably heard from us, for those of you that work for communities and agencies, we're looking out to see what existing watershed studies you have that we can leverage, any existing survey data that you have that we could bring into the models, any historical flood information. So this may be records of flooding, any reports like where you have nuisance flooding, particular homes, roads that may have to close, any high watermark data. So if you have any photographs or just marks where you flagged where high watermarks are, we can go out there, we can send surveyors out there to actually measure that. That would be critical for validating the models. One of the secondary objectives is to provide something that could potentially help support water quality and ecology considerations. So any concerns or data you have on that you may want to share, we can take it into consideration and see if there's anything we could help to accommodate that down the road. So as I say, we're just doing this data research now. Any data you have, you can share that we can leverage that saves us having to go out there, do detailed survey or having to recreate the wheel. That really will just save more money for implementing projects. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Jerry Daniels. You may have heard from her already, would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yes, I've already submitted data that shows variations between officially reported elevations and real elevations that contribute to flooding where I stay at. Does that need to be forwarded to you, or does that need to stay in this committee?
If you have any information like that, feel free to send that on to me. We can review that and see how it can be used. Because one of the key things we want to do, any real data you have, we can use that to validate our models. We're going to recreate events like the 2016 flood. And so having any data that we can make sure our model's hitting the mark, doing exactly what you guys see, that's going to be critical. And then we can use that to forecast what a 100-year flood would be or any other return period.
Great, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, y'all. I'm going to walk us through one little housekeeping item that I think we're going to pick up kind of more in full in the next call, which is, what does this provisional recommendation look like? So just bringing us real quickly to our next business item. We've kind of worked on the state side to see what degree can we add some consistency, right, among the watershed regions. And so in our next call, I think we're going to go a little bit more into what are some specific questions that we can kind of answer in a recommendation that comes from this group regarding governance. So we just want to run through that really quickly. And then Rachel, I think you want to maybe preview a few things coming up.
And we can skip this slide, Evelyn, because I can speak to it in the next one. I recognize that we've now borrowed 4 more minutes of people's time. So essentially what that was saying is we're going to have a meeting on January 7th. That meeting, y'all, we are going to specifically begin to hammer down into one model. A lot of the questions about function today are things that we can address more succinctly and more clearly, especially with the information that we heard from y'all today. For our January 28th meeting, there was a discussion about rescheduling that. We don't actually need to do that anymore because the provisional governance recommendation isn't due until January 31st now. So we will continue on January 28th as scheduled. Do you want to provide a reminder about the natural channel design webinar that's taking place in 2 days on Thursday, December 17th from 1 to 3 p.m. We'll have a reminder link that's going out to everybody else. And I think Ross and Chuck, if y'all want to take us through the adoption of the November meeting minutes, November 19 meeting minutes.
Sure. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes? And if so, use your name.
Ronnie Carter.
Can I get a second?
Earl.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none, motion passes.
Perfect.
Well, I think this is my favorite meeting that we had. I just want to take 10 seconds and say I enjoyed the breakout groups. I enjoyed the one-on-one sort of, just like I said, the breakout groups. It was great. And if we can incorporate something like that in the future, maybe consider it. Chuck?
I would like to say also too, on the natural channel design, there will be an overflow meeting that night at 6:30 for those that cannot attend during work hours. So you're welcome to join us then. And invite everybody you know.
All right.
It's going to be a blast.
Thanks to everybody again. I know everybody's working hard and it shows. So I know we all appreciate it. So if I can have a motion to adjourn.
Bridget Bailey, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Devin Foyle, second.
See y'all on the 7th. Have a good Christmas, New Year's, holidays. Make it happen, make it safe, and see y'all next year.
Thanks y'all so much. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Whew.